Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in September and October of this year because I was very busy near the beginning of October, so I did not make a monthly wrap-up for that. So now I'm doing a double, and so there's lots of books to talk about, so I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, so I started off with House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. This book was not for me, basically. I did end up finishing it, but it's just because I had DNF'd other stuff recently and I was really in the mood to finish something, so I kept on powering through. Basically what this book is about is there are three sisters, the Hollow sisters. That's their name. Their last name is Hollow. It's Vivi, Gray, and our main character Iris. So this is a young adult mystery with fantastical elements. And basically what happened is the three girls went missing when they were children, and they came back exactly 1 month later. But they came back kind of weird. Their hair grows back white or turns white instead of the dark that it was before. Their eyes turn completely black, and their baby teeth fall out again, even though they had already gotten their adult teeth. Weird stuff is happening around them. And people react to them weirdly. People are strangely drawn to them, and they have this sort of ability to make people do what they want. So they're weird now, and everybody loves them. They're incredibly beautiful, and they're mysterious from that event, and, people are obsessed with them. So the oldest sister is a fashion designer, and her label is the House of Hollow, which is where the book gets its name. I had thought it was going to be a literal house, which I don't know why I thought that, because the synopsis is basically that the adult, the oldest, Gray, goes missing. And so Iris and Vivi team up to try and find out what happened to her. From there, all sorts of mysteries unfold. Well, it's really just the one mystery. Some fantastical stuff happens. They involve Gray's boyfriend, who is basically well, I need to help you find her. He says that they're exes now, but he's I need to help you find her so that people don't think that I murdered her. That's his reasoning. I liked the boyfriend and I liked the character of Vivi pretty well, but I didn't really connect with the speaking character, Iris, very much. The pacing just didn't really agree with me. A lot of the spooky stuff didn't really work for me. It just wasn't exactly my cup of tea. It was a little bit too slow, and I just didn't really feel that attached to it. It wasn't bad, but there were some writing style choices that I wasn't really into. So it wasn't bad, just not really for me. And that was, again, House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. The next thing I read was The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. And I absolutely loved this book. I'm doing a lot of kind of dense technical reading right now for my school. So having something really light and fluffy and fast-paced and romantic and fun is exactly what I needed in my spare time. And that's exactly what The Ballad of Never After delivers on. It is very page-turny. Every chapter ends on kind of a cliffhanger, and you're oh, what is going on? There's lots of mysteries. Let me back up. This is a sequel to the Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber as well. And it is about this girl, Evangeline. Basically, her heart has been broken because the person that she was in love with is marrying her stepsister. And he won't talk to her, so she's extremely confused about what's going on, why this is happening. She thought they were in love, so what the heck? So she goes to the Prince of Hearts, his chapel, and basically in this world, in this fantasy world, they're kind of demigods. They have particular powers, and some people worship them. So she goes to the chapel of the Prince of Hearts to pray for help in order to get her lover back. But then he is there. He shows up, the Prince of Hearts, and he's I can help you out, but it's gonna be bad for you. You're not gonna like the way it goes. And she's no, nothing could be worse than what I'm feeling right now. And then the rest of the books basically prove how wrong she is in that moment. And I absolutely love book 2. I liked book 1. I don't know if I was just in a weird mood when I was reading book 1, but book 2 just connected with me so much more. I felt the characters were way more well defined, that the adventure was great. Because I guess I feel that book 1 was a lot more setup, and we get a lot more payoffs in this book. But it was absolutely fantastic. It had such an amazing ending, and I can't wait for book 3 of this series. Next, I read volume 7 of Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama. And if you've been on my channel for any length of time, you know that this is a series that I absolutely love, and volume 7 was no different. I had seen a spoiler for volume 7. I think it was volume 7, so apologies if I've talked about this before. But I had seen a spoiler for it. I was very upset by the thing that happened in the spoiler. But then I got to the moment when it's supposed to happen, and as it turns out, the spoiler was a metaphor, which is great news because the thing that I thought happened didn't actually happen. So when I read this, I actually felt a lot of relief, even though the thing that happened was still not great. This series is about a young girl who loves magic, and she wants to be a witch so badly, but you have to be born a witch. But then she finds a spell book and copies a spell, and it works. It works tragically in a terrible way. This happens in the first chapter, but she finds out that you don't actually have to be born a witch. Anybody can do it. And so basically the rest of the series is her trying to fix the mistake that she made with that first spell. And then we get into a lot of lore and world building. There are tons of characters and they're all fantastic. I love this series. The art itself is just so gorgeous, and I really highly recommend this to anybody who likes manga. Then I had a couple of DNFs. I was trying to read more spooky stuff, but I'm pretty particular with stuff that is not fantasy, and these two just weren't really working for me for various reasons. The first one was The Cousins by Karen Mcmanus, and the second one was Hide by Kiersten White. The Cousins is basically about this family. I don't remember their name, which I probably would if I had finished the book, but the grandmother, the matriarch of the family, basically cut off all of her children from their family life. She doesn't talk to them. They're not going to inherit. And she does this with just a "you know what you did" note that she gives them, or that their lawyer gives them on her behalf. But the children allege that they don't know what they did. So what the book actually is about is their children, these three cousins, trying to figure out what happened when they get invited to an island where the grandma lives, and they are invited to work at her resort. And the parents are thinking, this is our way back in. I have no idea what happens. It just wasn't hanging on to me very well. I didn't really like the setting that much, and I wasn't really very attached to the characters. So I decided to go ahead and put it down. Then I started reading Hide by Kiersten White, which I was actually really loving. It was very spooky. The tension was super high, and I was really enjoying it. But it's not that it was too scary for me, although it was pretty scary. It was just a little too dark for me, which is silly in adult thrillers because they're probably going to be dark. But basically the main character had a backstory that was done in a way that made me really sad, in a way that I wasn't enjoying reading about. So I went ahead and put it down. I do feel like the tension is really there though. So if you do enjoy that kind of thing and you won't be too bummed out by sad backstories, then I highly recommend this. I mean, as highly as somebody can recommend something that they DNF'd. Then finally, I picked up The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik. This is the third book in the Scholomance series. And what the series is about is basically wizard school. And specifically, there is one young wizard who her abilities are very specific, and they are all world destroying. It's all catastrophically huge, powerful disaster magic. So she has a hard time because mana is an extremely valuable resource in this, and mana is what makes all of your spells happen. So in order for her to get ahead, she has to have a lot of mana. So basically, it just follows her adventures trying to navigate the Scholomance. This is a dark and kind of creepy series. I definitely think it's a very dark academia type magic school setting, which I really enjoyed, and I love the two main characters, Elle and Orion. Orion is like the golden boy of the school because his ability is to suck the mana out of monsters. Obviously, this is really good. So everybody loves him and he loves fighting monsters and saving people. So he is really well beloved. He has angered our main girl, Elle, by saving her life too many times, which she thinks is a great injustice and needs to be corrected at once. Our first book starts off with her being furious at him for daring to rescue her. I really love this series. The ending was fantastic. A lot of what I love about this series is the lore of the world and the setting, even though that setting is definitely very dark. And I know I just said I can't stomach this kind of stuff. And that was one thing that was a little bit hard about this series, is that there is a lot of darkness to it. But if you, like I said, if you don't mind that kind of thing, I really highly recommend this. This is an adult fantasy, even though the characters are set in basically high school. And I'm pretty sure the reason is because of the darkness of the world setting. However, I just think the magic system is really cool. The characters are great and the vibes are fantastic. So if you're looking for a magical dark academia, would be a really good one. By the time we reached October, I had kind of given up on my trying to read spooky books because it just was not really working for me. So instead, I just stuck with what I know, which is fantasy. And the first two things that I read were volumes 8 and 9 of Hat Atelier. I just told you what that series was, so I'm not going to do it again. But I will tell you that for volumes 8 and 9, the tension is definitely ramping up. There are definitely consequences occurring for certain character actions, and we're getting into kind of the darker flip side of what has so far been really just charming, beautiful magic. Now we're starting to see the ways in which it impacts people in not so great ways. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm loving the depth of character that we're getting. With these new challenges, we're definitely seeing new sides of different characters, and I'm absolutely loving that. So volumes 8 and 9 were fantastic, and I can't wait for volume 10. Next, I read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This I wanted to read because it was highly recommended both with Cindy and Carrie Can Read, which are channels that I love. And so I really wanted to check these out. And I finally got around to it. It had been a while that I'd been planning to read them, but I finally got these from the library. And, well, I keep saying these because I also picked up Sorcery of Thorns, but I haven't finished reading that yet. So An Enchantment of Ravens, though, was fantastic. I absolutely loved the main guy. And the main girl was also pretty great. I loved the plot. This is just a really enjoyable, beautiful book to read. And what it's about might be helpful. Basically, the main girl paints fairies, by which I mean fairies are real, and they come to her to get portraits commissioned. She is like the best portrait lady. She is the best portrait artist that the fairies can find, and they absolutely love her. And then one day she gets a commission from the Prince of Autumn. He comes to her because she's the best, and he's like, paint my portrait. She starts painting him, and she sees something in his face that's different. And so she keeps studying it, and she realizes on the last day that it's sorrow. So she paints the sorrow into his face, into his eyes. He comes and picks it up the next day without seeing it, and then he presents it to his court, his autumn court, and gets laughed at. And by laughed at, I mean everybody's like, there's something wrong in his face, and we can all see it now. And furious, he returns to her, and he's like, you did something wrong. You sabotaged my portrait, and now my power is wobbly. Things are not going well for me as a prince back at my court. So you need to come and stand trial to make up for this and make this right. So what follows is an adventure through fairyland. And a lot of the tension in this comes from the main character trying to carefully make her way around fairies, because there are a lot of fairy rules. They're very dangerous and powerful, and she's just a weak human. So a lot of the tension comes from that. And there's also a romantic element that I really, really loved in this series. Not a series, in this book. The romance was carried off so beautifully and with such interesting ideas. I just really loved this. I loved the descriptions of all of Fairy, the characters. This was just such a fun story, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. I think it really helped pull me out of what was kind of becoming a reading slump, and now I'm just really excited about reading again. And finally, the last thing that I read in October was Lore Olympus Volume 3 by Rachel Smythe, and this surprised me because I didn't realize it was coming out so soon. And it's kind of tragic because book 4, volume 4, is not coming out until like May, I think, of next year. So the wait is going to be so long, which is like normal for books, but still. But this continues the story of Hades and Persephone retold in this beautiful comic style. I'm absolutely loving this series. I don't want to get into too much of what happens in volume 4, but I liked it better than volume 2, and so it's back on the same par as volume 1, and I enjoyed volume 2 a lot as well, but volumes 1 and 3 are my favorites so far. And that was everything I read over the last couple of months. There were a couple DNFs in there, but also some really standout books. Like I said, I think I'm pulling out of a reading slump. I'm currently reading Sorcery of Thorns, so I'll let you know how I felt about that for my wrap up next month, but I think I'm really going to love it. I'm loving it so far. So that's pretty much everything. I hope you guys are having good reads and had wonderful reads these last couple of months. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and have a beautiful night, universe.